Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. And just to begin today's show, just wanted to give a quick moment of silence as we remember the three Carlton players who were unfortunately killed in a car accident. That's now been 7 years. James Adams, Michael Goodgame, Paxton Harview. And so just really quick, a remembrance of those folks from our community that we lost 7 years ago. Still remember where I was. Got off the plane at Stanford Invite and turned my phone on and got the news. So just remembering their legacy and their families in the Carlton community. We have a great interview today with Will Deaver from USA Ultimate. Looking forward to talking with him about return to play, about USA Ultimate's plan for the next couple of years, looking back at the pandemic response. And so we don't want to waste any time. We're going to jump right into that. Keith, you ready to roll?
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk to Will.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Will Deaver. Joining us now on Deep Look is the head of competition and athlete programs at USA Ultimate, Will Deaver. Will, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a great time to have a chance to talk to somebody at USAU. I know things have probably been very strange for you. At least you haven't had to make the commute from Boulder to Colorado Springs. That has to be a silver lining in all this, yes?
Silver lining indeed. Yeah. We've learned to make it work, not just for me, but for everybody. So it's a new world.
So what's the current status of thinking at USA Ultimate when it comes to when are we going to be able to have some national tournaments returning? Are you seeing that happening in 2021? And if so, when?
Yeah, I mean, we are still planning on the summer being the point at which we at least need to plan for. Whether or not things pan out and we end up holding the events, I think is still, there's a lot that can change, between now and kind of that time where you have to make that final call. But our goal is to continue to look at July and later as the time where we can actually have an event that people could travel to and that could be run safely and in accordance with guidelines. And those guidelines, we were able to update those recently, and I think those will be really helpful for the next several months, if not the rest of the year. But I also think the situation is going to change over the next several months as well with vaccine rollout. And but that's all sort of TBD what it'll look like in even a couple of months.
It feels like basically the whole world has been kind of TBD for far too long. So it's nice to start to feel like we're getting closer to a point where we can make determinations, even though we are kind of waiting on what's going to happen with the vaccine and distribution. You mentioned the return to play guidelines that USA Ultimate recently put out and updated. So from the update, what do you feel like is the top line takeaway? What should people be taking away from that information and utilizing?
I mean, I think the top line, very practical takeaway is the mask use. I think that has been, so we put the first version of it out in the summer, almost a year ago, and a lot has changed. A lot of information about how effective masks are, as well as how tolerable, I guess, for lack of a better word, they can be to even doing sports activities. And I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of actual safety. But I think it'll make a big difference in terms of people's mindset as well, like feeling safe, feeling like they're, in a place where they can get involved and not be taking as big a risk. And so I think that, that's one very specific thing. I think there's been a lot of other things too, like the differentiating between indoor and outdoor activities, and an understanding about youth rates of infection and severe illness relative to adults. I mean, these are some of the windows that I think that provide an opportunity to go do some activity. But I think it's all, comes down to what's going on at that local level as well, and really making sure that that whatever the situation is locally is going to be conducive to whatever kind of activity. And this is, and I know that's been said over and over again, but I really mean, like, you're talking about a college campus, for instance, where they have very specific rules. You talk about, high schools and what they're allowing people to do. So it's not just about, like, what's the state doing. It goes beyond that.
When you think ahead to trying to hold a big club tournament, let's say in the summertime, what are there metrics in place that you need to see to feel comfortable doing that?
Not yet. In terms of saying, some percentage of people that have to be vaccinated, or whether we require vaccines or testing. I mean, all of that is still a conversation that's happening at a level beyond just USA Ultimate. I mean, sports in general are talking about that. The society as a whole is talking about those things.
Right.
But, that's something that we're going to dive into with our medical group over the next couple of months as we start to get into actually planning for these summer events, and start to basically translate those return to play guidelines and all those protocols into very specific, goals and objectives and tactics for these big events. And, whether it's, some kind of herd immunity metric that has to be reached, I'm not sure we're going to get that specific. I think it's, some of it's going to be about, polling the people to see if they're willing to come, looking at the situation on the ground. I mean, you got to have a critical mass. And I think you've got different audiences that we're trying to serve, everything from youth players to masters and club in between. So I think that'll be part of the equation as well.
It feels like, and from what we're hearing, that Youth Ultimate is probably the closest, particularly high school Ultimate, to potentially having events in the near future. Do you have a sense from your communications with that grouping, like how much Ultimate we might be seeing and when they might actually get to play?
Yeah, how much? I mean, I'm not sure how to describe how much, but I think that you've definitely got organizers, and we just had our organizers convention online a few weeks ago, and in some of those conversations, and I did a session on return to play and got some feedback, which was good to hear. I mean, the organizers are hearing from the parents and from the kids that, as schools open back up, as other activities are being conducted safely, that Ultimate, can and perhaps should be one of those activities. Again, there's a lot of things to navigate at each local situation, but I think that there's a real desire to make those opportunities available. And so I think as we start talking, and we're doing it now with our state organizers, our state youth coordinators, and the state organizations and the other local groups that we work with, they are starting to plan for a variety of activities. I've seen everything from, talking about doing alternative things like skills challenges and disc golf and, just practicing, which would be a win, right? In a lot of cases, just having clubs be able to get together, to actually scheduling out, a quote tournament, but it would be maybe held over the course of a bunch of weeks instead of, all at once. Those are some of the things that we're seeing groups talk about and that we're trying to help them plan.
I mean, I think it's not a reach at all to say that things are going to change dramatically for the better over the next 2 months as vaccinations increase. It's already been expected from, modeling that, we're going to get a critical mass of U.S. adults vaccinated by the end of May. And the Biden administration just came out and basically said the same thing, that we're going to have enough vaccines for everybody by the end of May, I will not be surprised, if public availability of the vaccines is out there in April at this point, depending on which state you live in. So, once people have access to vaccines, and we, in theory, given what we know about the effectiveness of the vaccines, we're going to see hospitalizations drop dramatically. We're going to see deaths fall dramatically. At that point, is it time to start holding ultimate tournaments again? Like, I guess the reason I ask about metrics is because I'm trying to understand how are people ready for what is going to be, a significantly different looking landscape in literally 2 to 3 months.
Yeah. I think, there's this crazy psychology that's going on across the world and in our country for the past year that we're still working our way through, right? How are we going to all feel, right? Like a lot of us have felt differently from each other depending on our circumstances and our leanings towards various philosophies, right? Like it's been that way. And I think we're about to hit another threshold, right? A new piece of information. There's a lot of vaccinations out there. It's going to make it safer. There's still there's still things that we don't know about the vaccines that are related to preventing spread. Obviously, they prevent serious illness in a significant way. And I got to caveat everything I'm going to say right now. I meant to do it earlier, but I am not a medical expert, right? I am lucky to be able to work with an amazing group of medical experts on our medical working group. And so we're going to just continue to lean heavily on them, rely on them, as well as, relying on external information to figure out, where is it safe to start making different decisions? Like what can we allow, and what can we support, and what can we actively go do? And I think that'll be helpful in terms of leading the way and setting a standard and setting some expectations, but it's still going to come down to other people making their own decisions, whether it's local organizers or coaches or parents and players. And I think you're going to see a mixed bag. I think we have no expectation that even if we hold a big national tournament, that we're going to see the same people or the same numbers. It's going to be, a ramp up, I think.
As we get to the point that we may be emerging from the pandemic, as Charlie pointed out, in the next couple of months, we could be getting closer to a return to normalcy, whatever that may mean to people. I found that I personally have been reflecting back on the past few years and even the past year or so, and how I felt at the beginning of all this. Looking back at USA Ultimate and how you've engaged throughout this event, is there anything you feel like you would change if you could go back and redo it? Is there anything that you feel like USA Ultimate, the organization, would do differently to help the community through this really challenging time?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, I think that taken one way, I would say, we really did the best that we could, given what we knew every step along the way, right? Like we had to make rolling decisions about, when do we cancel events and how long do you kind of hang on to the possibility of doing things. And maybe in hindsight, if you go back and you say, all right, I know what I know now, maybe we would make some more decisions earlier. And I think there was, we heard some frustration along the way of this kind of yellow light, right? The maybe it's going to happen thing, which was really tough. But that's looking back and knowing that, yeah, of course, nothing was able to happen. I think in the moment, it felt like the right thing to do. And I probably under the same circumstances do it again that way. And I think, maybe we'll get into this in some other questions, but I think that there's it's interesting to think about how our community is structured and the kinds of forces that are at work, so to speak, and that support the play. We're in a very different place than a lot of other sports. We're growing and we're bigger than we've ever been. At least we were. And there's a lot of resources and infrastructure that didn't exist before, but we're still really small. And there's a lot of volunteers that support most of what happens. And that's different than having professional administrators and coaches and, these other infrastructures that other sports have. And I think that really changed the way that the sport approached doing stuff, even when maybe it could have been done. And I think just recognizing that, and talking more about that and might have been useful, at least in terms of setting people's expectations. Like for what, you don't look at the NBA and go, why isn't Club Ultimate doing that? And don't even look at your local soccer club and say, why isn't our Frisbee team doing that? Because that local soccer club has, $500,000 budget and 5 staff people and a bunch of paid coaches, right? So I think that's one thing that I sort of have recognized, and that, maybe is useful in terms of people thinking about how our sport can be the same as or is different from others.
How is Ultimate going to bounce back from this?
I think hopefully by the end of the year in a significant enough way for people to sort of feel like there really is like the light at the end of the tunnel, that we're sort of reaching the light, like that it won't be such a slow trickle, because I think there is this pent up demand. And as soon as we're able to safely do things, I think that we'll get enough people to come out that where it'll start to look and feel like what we remember, enough. But I do think that it's going to take a few years to get back where we were. I think that's just, some of it'll be, people that maybe are reluctant still and waiting to feel safe. Some of it's just going to be the momentum lost. Like every year keeping that college team going when it's reliant on a few key people, and it's reliant on having that critical mass of players. And if you just lose a few people, then maybe that team disappears or isn't as active for a year or two. And I think building all that back up is going to take a little bit of time.
That's something that we've actually talked about on the show, or are the challenges that will come with return to play and with the potential attrition at programs. And we talked a lot about, novel high school, club, and college programs, programs that won't have a lot of the institutional knowledge that exists on major programs that allow them to weather the storm. Does USA Ultimate have any plans to put programs in place or any sort of activities that'll help those types of teams, those teams that maybe are a little more on the fringes or don't have the same kind of numbers and now are in a really tenuous position should they have the opportunity to return to play?
Yeah. I mean, we have some of those programs already, and whether we're able to implement them at kind of a scale that might be necessary to really hit that problem head on, I think that's TBD. Our resources are going to be more limited, at least at first, and so I think that's going to be part of the equation. I think that it is going to have to be a little bit of a wait and see. Like, we're going to need to see, like, where is the attrition occurring, if there is any. I mean, we know there will be. Is it with the high school division? Is it with college? Is it across the board? I think once we get a better sense for where we're taking the hit as a community, we can kind of target our resources in those areas. And I think that we have been talking for years about infrastructure and building out the local organizations, and some of them operate independently from USA Ultimate right now. We obviously work with them still through lots of activities, but even that direct infrastructure that we're building with the affiliates and the state orgs, I've seen that at work now in a pretty real way, because there is a definite connection and a relationship there with those organizations that we're relying on to get information, to provide help. And I think that being able to use that infrastructure to, get down to that team and community level is going to be really important. I mean, in New York, for instance, where y'all are at, like being able to talk to Colin and being able to talk to just New York, and not have to go directly out to those teams necessarily and figure out what's happening with every single one of them. Having a local group there that we're connected to is going to help us find ways to be as helpful as we can be.
With this year plus long stoppage of the sport, you know, you've been doing this a long time. What does this make you reflect on and think about how Ultimate needs to change in the future to try to, you know, get back to where it's been, or fix some of the underlying issues that maybe you're seeing pop up at this point? Like how has the pandemic changed the way that you think about the sort of the future of Ultimate?
Yeah, it's definitely been a time to reflect. I think some of the things that come to mind, one is making sure that we've got a diversity of programs and activities, that we're not kind of just a one-trick pony, that we're offering value in a lot of different ways. And again, I'm speaking a little bit more about USA Ultimate than the sport as a whole. Mm-hmm. But I do think that you could probably apply that, elsewhere as well. You know, is our sport one where all we do is play giant tournaments on the weekends, and that's the way that it works? And I think that there's tons of value in that. I mean, we all love it, and that's part of what attracts people and keeps them involved. But it's also not, you can't just do that, right? And match play has been something we've talked about forever. That is a lot more sustainable in many ways. It's a lot more accessible. There's some economies of scale that don't work great with match play, especially when it involves travel. But I think that the more we grow and that population density kind of starts to occur where you don't have to go as far to get what you're looking for, I think that that's going to be pretty key. And I could see over time that being more of where we are headed as a sport, which is not surprising. That's what a lot of sports have done. So I think, diversifying the kinds of programs we do as well, where you've got ways for people to stay involved in the sport or just in disc sports in general. We have continued to think about younger and younger players and how, again, it's not like they're not going to get out and just start playing the ultimate that we all see at 7-on-7 big tournaments. They're just playing with a Frisbee, right? And so building out programs and structures that, would have been a lot easier to continue to do in a situation like this where travel and groups are limited. Like, I think that's going to translate into more opportunities for the sport down the line as well. All the top end stuff is tricky. I think it remains the same kind of trickiness as before. You've got pro leagues kind of doing one thing. You've got tournament style stuff happening through us. I think that'll continue to just evolve, and we'll see what the market can bear. And I think, back to the infrastructure thing, I think we got to just keep building that infrastructure out. I think local orgs and funneling resources down to that level where they can do the work with the teams at the ground level, that's going to be the key to the sport getting back on its feet and then continuing to grow.
Speaking of tournaments and infrastructure, we recently did an episode where we got kind of wild ideas about changes to Ultimate. And whenever we ask about changes to Ultimate or to Club Ultimate, we get feedback about, certainly over the past year or two, about the Triple Crown Tour and about, how teams miss a lot of the regional club competition that came before the Triple Crown Tour. Are you hearing the same sort of feedback? And, given that there's this big break and you're kind of investigating the infrastructure of the sport, what do you see as the future of the Triple Crown Tour in Club Ultimate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, we were kind of getting into a good time. We were 7 or 8 years in to that structure where we had kind of gotten past this is change and I don't like it, or people were fired up about certain aspects of it, and we're sort of settled in. And as that we work with that club working group, every year with player reps and get a lot of good feedback there. And I would say that, there's a sense that, people have kind of settled in to the things that they like about the structure. And there are definitely teams that and it'll be interesting this year because a little sneak peek here, but we're going to, if we do something, it's going to be a lot more flexible than it has been. And so we'll see, how do people respond to that? Do they wish that there was more structure? I think people will probably, take everything this year with a grain of salt. But I think that, it'll be an opportunity to kind of come back a year from now after having gone through a less structured playing environment and then really see, like, what is it that people missed? What is it that people liked about the less structure, or do they want more structure again? Was that something that they really enjoyed? All that said, I think that travel is probably the biggest thing. It always has been, from people complaining about the site of regionals to now the more kind of social justice angle on thinking about access and opportunity. Do you have high barriers for entry to the sport? I think that there's, travel is at the heart of a ton of that stuff. So I think that'll be something that we continue to look at. And I don't know if y'all remember, but before we did the Triple Crown Tour and we were looking at those different models of how to evolve the club structure, there were some different models that we considered. These, more regionalized. Super regionals. That's right. Yeah. And the more regionalized model, maybe that, is something that we take another look at some point. But, I just hope we can get back to, getting on the field and at the events again. And people kind of remembering what they love about it. Cause really it's just about making sure that players and teams have something to do. And we can tweak the rest along the way. But we got to get back, we got to get people back. We got to do it safely. Can't rush it. But I do think that in terms of, like, when you talk about 6 months, a year from now, I think we will probably be really thinking about, numbers and critical mass and things like that, more than the finer details of exactly what a bid allocation system should look like, or, that kind of thing.
Are you considering a 24 team nationals for club?
Like this year or in general?
Yeah. Let's say this year.
This year, I would say it hasn't been a specific conversation. Again, like you just named a detail. And I'd say, I just hope we can have the event.
Sure.
And, we've got a date and a location, as part of an agreement in place. It's got a certain number of fields. I think there's some things you have to work through when you expand an event, that may be limited when you already have something in place. But yeah, we've been talking about expanding nationals, every year for the last several years.
I mean, are there specific things you're talking about? I mean, it's March, whatever day it is, March 4th. We're not that far off from when you would be considering normally holding the US Open and YCC. Are you thinking about trying to have that tournament this year?
Like I said, we're going to have some information coming out in the next week, that kind of lays out some of that. So I'm not going to get ahead of myself because I think it's important to have context. But like I said, July, and from there, we are going to need to start planning for events if we're going to have a chance of having them. And,
right.
And so that is sort of where we're headed. So, we are hoping to have, YCC, US Open, and, those kinds of events.
When you try to map out the next, let's say, 2 years, what are you looking at? What's the strategy for USA Ultimate? Because it's not going to be business as usual for obvious reasons. So, what are the goals that you have in place for these next 2 years as things, hopefully ramp back up to a level of normalcy at some point in the next, 18 months?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there are some midterm goals, which have to do with the organization and the sport kind of getting back on its feet. That's going to involve creating playing opportunities, being super flexible. I mean, super flexible, not just timing, but like format, structures, like all of that stuff, just to get people playing again, and doing it safely and doing it in a way that they feel comfortable, because that's going to start to create some of that momentum that we had built before. And I think that's going to lay the groundwork for what is possible next. Everything from new playing opportunities to all the other things that we're doing that are a priority, like continuing to focus on diversity and equity, inclusion, continuing to focus on youth and supporting local organizations. Those things, it requires resources to be able to do any of that stuff. And the resources come from having people participating. And so that's first. And then I think beyond that, bigger picture is really kind of a question of revisiting our strategic plan. I mean, we had a 3-year plan in place. We were about halfway through it when it got seriously derailed. And right. We normally, I think, would be in this place where we would be thinking, okay, it's time to start working on our next strategic plan. We went from our very first one, we've done 3 now. Very first one was like a 6-year window. The next one was like a 5-year window. And now we shrunk it down to a 3-year window, because we just recognize, like, you got to be ready to respond to changing situations. So we were going to be at that place where we were going to need to start doing that anyway. Obviously, the question now is, do you go ahead and do it and kind of start from scratch, or do you look at our current plan and say, well, we didn't get to do that. Let's give ourselves a chance to go after those goals, but with a bit of a delay. So I think that's a conversation that the board is going to need to have with the staff and to some degree too with the community. See what we're ready for.
Next time, there's got to be 2 plans, like a everything goes well plan and a force majeure, the world ends for a year.
Total disaster plan.
Yeah, total. It's funny. Not funny. It's not funny, but it's, I don't know. It's interesting that we had operating reserves set aside that have not entirely insulated us from some pretty, painful adjustments this year and last, but kept things from going completely off the rails. And I remember some of those conversations when we were, as a board the board was doing board things and thinking about the future and the finances. And it was really interesting thinking through, like, how much do you need? What could happen? And this was definitely not one of the things that anybody brought up, was a global pandemic. There were lots of other things that people thought about, and time periods where revenue would be lost in chunks and things like that. But, it was in a lot of ways good planning. But yeah, knowing Plan B was not there beyond that, as far as like the specifics of this kind of situation.
There's almost certainly going to be pushback on Ultimate that is organized and played. We've already seen it. And that's almost irrespective of what the actual relative safety of playing Ultimate is. Is USA Ultimate prepared to move forward with having events and sanctioning events, given that, the safety protocols are being followed and the COVID-19 guidelines that USA Ultimate have put out are being followed, even if there is pushback from some folks in the community?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing we're used to, it's not making everybody happy all the time. So we can certainly navigate those waters. But I think we need to continue to listen. What is it that people are saying? Why are they upset? Because a lot of times it's for legit reasons, and we just need to be paying attention to kind of all the different angles. I do think that doing things responsibly, will still result in some people being unhappy or feel like we're not ready. And even I would say, there will be almost certainly situations where infection occurs, in or around an event. Ultimate players will get sick. It'll come up. And I certainly hope that the things that we do as a sport and as a community, as a society, to minimize the negative impacts of that are the right things, and that we avoid any tragic situations. But, like schools right now, I mean, it's a good example. There are schools in session because it's important, and they figured out ways to mostly do it safely. And yet every once in a while, somebody is sick, and then they shut down that class and they send people home. And, I think those are the kinds of things that we have to be prepared to handle. And of course, if the situation tips and something happens that suddenly feels like, oh, now we're not doing the right things, or this isn't, the situation changes, then we're going to have to backtrack. We don't want to just put the blinders on and charge ahead. But I do think that we are going to need to be ready to proceed with not everybody on board.
Got it. All right. Well, always great to hear from you. Thanks for stopping by and giving us some time. Anything else that you want to note? Any news you want to break while you're here on the show?
Keep your eye on things for next week. There'll be some more info coming out. I think there'll be a few things that happen over the course of the spring that I know y'all are interested in: events, rules, things like that could spur some additional conversations. Rules. And I'll just say, I think that continuing to focus on the strategies that we have in our plan, including equity and diversity, I think is going to be a really interesting challenge for our community right now. I think that, it's going to be hard for everybody to be able to come back at the same time in the same way. And yet we still need to recognize where those challenges can be addressed in new ways. And I think some of this localized push for play is going to kind of dovetail nicely with some of those things. Because I think that there is a focus right now on local and access. And I think that's really good. We will still end up with hopefully some big events this summer, and we'll do our best to help people along the way. We'll just keep our eye on our mission, which is to provide a way for people to play the sport. And, that's what we're here for. And we can hopefully help ourselves do it and others do it safely in the next 3 to 6 months. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Will Deaver with us here on Deep Look. Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, thank you all. I look forward to seeing you again at some point this year.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Thanks again to Will Deaver for joining us. Keith, any takeaways from what Will had to say?
I found myself thinking about, he mentioned, the NBA, he mentioned, how do you like the tournament format and stuff. I never really thought about what would happen if we returned to tournaments. And he said, chances are somebody will contract the virus or get sick at some point. What would we do if somebody got sick at a tournament? Like if we had a case reported at, Sunday morning, some team was like, oh, so-and-so went to the hospital or they tested positive or whatever. Like in the NBA, they've been shutting teams down for a week or two and just postponing all of their games. But like, what do you do if you're at a tournament? Do you shut down that team and every team that they played on Saturday? Like what? I don't even know.
Those are conversations that we have to have. I mean, I think
it's funny. It never even crossed my mind because it's always felt so far from us actually playing and being at a tournament. But like these will be things people need to have in place.
I mean, I think the big thing is like, what are the rules going to be about how teams are to, have their lodging and their car rentals? Like if people are staying in hotel rooms together, that's obviously a much higher risk scenario than if everybody has their own room. And so at what point do you say that, contact tracing protocols mean that all these players can't play? That's a great question. I think those are difficult questions to answer right now without knowing kind of like what USAU is thinking in terms of tournament play.
Troubling to think about, but certainly not to be a wet blanket after, I think overall really thoughtful ideas from Deaver about, what the future may look like for US Ultimate. Certainly, it feels like we're turning the corner in some ways, and in the next few months there will be sanctioned Ultimate being played.
Well, we'll see what happens. There's certainly a lot of good news right now about vaccinations and the pace thereof. So we will see. Let us know your thoughts. Hit us up at DeepLookPod on Twitter, deeplook@ultiworld.com by email. And that's going to do it for today's show. Check us out in the subscriber bonus as well. You can subscribe for less than $4 a month at ultiworld.com/subscribe. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.